Often, you may think cars are the easiest things to love. I mean, they got you around town. Surely that must count for something. Well, no, because there are some special cases where the car is more of a hassle than an advantage. So we present to you in this video a list of the most brutally hated cars of the 1950s. Cars which stood heads and shoulders above everyone else for just one thing, being absolutely horrible. Number 12. 1958 Chevrolet Biscayne. We begin our list with the Chevrolet Biscayne, a car that overperformed but was just too ugly to love. Introduced in 1958, the Biscayne was Chevrolet's primary full-size car. By 1959, it was the automaker's most affordable option within the full-size lineup, positioned below the moderately priced Bel Air and the higher-end Impala models. The Chevrolet Biscayne was predominantly meant for fleets than private owners. As such, it checked all the boxes for a fleet car. It was durable, solid, strong, and last but not least, affordable. The Biscayne was a practical vehicle, and many might argue that this was what also became its one flaw. Because Chevrolet focused on creating a cheap vehicle that could run, they stripped everything else to the minimum. It's like when you set your PC game's visual settings to ultra-low, just so you can chisel out the best speed and performance your computer can muster. However, it turns out people like their cars to perform excellently, but still please the eyes. The Biscayne's design was just flat-out basic. The car lacked style and flair. It didn't innovate mechanically or aesthetically, so it wasn't surprising when it sold poorly. The next car on our list suffered a weirdly different fate. Number 11. 1954 Kaiser Darrin. The next car is the 1954 Kaiser Darrin. The 1954 Kaiser Darrin was everything the Biscayne wasn't, but it still flopped big time. This sleek and eye-catching car was designed with sliding doors and is one of America's first ever sports car. Designed by Howard Darrin, the Kaiser Darrin was supposed to be that car that would rescue Kaiser Frazer from the looming extinction. The company had been impeccable when competition was few and far between, but by the mid-50s, America's Big Three was growing at breakneck speed, and Kaiser struggled to survive. While the Kaiser Darrin delivered aesthetically, its performance was uninspiring, and the public avoided this innovative car like a plague. Under the hood, the Kaiser Darrin could only boast a modest inline-six engine that was good for only 90 horsepower. It was not good enough to compete, and its rivals tore it apart. The Kaiser Darrin sold less than 500 units as more problems with the car's production quality, and its reliability became imminent. It was like perfecting all the flaws that plagued the Biscayne, but forgetting the most important part, the actual car performance. So, we've seen one car that lacked decent performance stats and another that was just downright ugly. Can you guess what went wrong with the next car on our list? Stick with us as we move into the actual top 10. Number 10. 1954 Nash Metropolitan. The special car with the unfortunate reputation. The Nash Metropolitan, often dubbed a motorized shopping car due to its compact size, was targeted at affluent urban women. However, its limited practicality and underwhelming performance made it less popular than intended. The Metropolitan was one of Nash's first ideas for a small car. However, compared to other small cars that were marketed as economical and cheap, the Metropolitan was advertised as a larger car's cute wife. The Metropolitan was small but packed with luxurious features to attract a following from the wealthy and affluent. But that will turn out to be a bad idea. While things didn't exactly end the way Nash had planned, every part of the production, design, and marketing of the Metropolitan was calculated and geared toward women. The Metropolitan was marketed as a motorized shopping cart for wealthy urban gals. So, where did it all go wrong for this old adorable? Well, for starters, it was the 50s, and while the love for compact cars was steadily increasing, the market for small economy cars was still small. The Metropolitan was a commercial failure, and the few people that bought the car highlighted several issues relating to its reliability and handling. Forget about cargo space. People struggled to fit comfortably in this tiny car that reporters quickly started calling one of the nastiest cars ever built. Since it was marketed as a female car, we imagine they didn't bother putting a lot of effort into the car's performance. The Metropolitan was severely underpowered as it was powered solely by a 1.2-liter motor. Europe was the birthplace of compact cars, so Austin expected the Metropolitan to do better there. They didn't. The Metropolitan was a failure both at home and abroad. We got 9 much worse cars on this list, so sit tight, this ride is going to be very bumpy. Number 9. 1958 Edsel Corsair. The Edsel Corsair was named after Henry Ford's son, so the company went over and beyond to make sure that this car didn't fail. To ensure no room for failure, the company invested $400 million in research and marketing of the Edsel Corsair. Still, The Corsair failed in the grandest of styles. The Edsel was one of the biggest financial flops in automotive history, with losses reaching $300 million. The Edsel Corsair even made several Ford dealers bankrupt, and we imagine many of them will hate this car forever. What went wrong? Let's call it over-marketing. The Edsel Corsair was marketed as an all-new, radically different car that was going to revolutionize the auto market. New features like self-adjusting brakes and automatic lubrication were somewhat exaggerated. Imagine how customers must have left their homes the morning of the Edsel Corsair's release, eager to see a generational vehicle only to find a rebranded Mercury. Nobody was impressed. Reporters were calling the Edsel Corsair a redecorated Mercury that was beaten up with an ugly stick. The car's uninspiring exterior didn't help matters. The horseshoe grille in the car's front bore the brunt of the Edsel sins. People started referring to the car as a Mercury pushing a toilet seat. Some people even went as far as comparing the horseshoe grille to a part of the female that shall not be named. Do the tail lamps look like ingrown toenails to you? Contrary to what you might think, many people didn't hate the Edsel because of its aesthetics. There are much uglier cars. They hated its performance. The car's fit and finish were not good. The Edsel Corsair came in the late 50s, the time of the recession when people were looking for smaller economy cars, not a Corsair that was quite expensive. But all that happened more than 70 years ago. Though a failure in its time, the Edsel Corsair has since become a collector's item, prized for its unique place in automotive history and could go for millions in the right auction. Goes to show you never know with some cars. They were just stuck at the wrong time. Do you agree that this was one of the worst cars of the 1950s? Let us know in the comments. Number 8. 1958 DeSoto Adventurer. The 1958 DeSoto Adventurer. A car from a pedigree of high performance, completely violet with a powerful engine, but just fell short in two areas: an outdated design coupled with an overall poor build quality. The on-paper performance levels were not able to provide competition its sleeker, more reliable competitors of the time. Chryslers of the 50s were famous for several things: their Virgil Exner $100 million looks, their strict quality control inspectors, their engineering pioneering, and their DeSoto flop. The DeSoto Adventurer was marketed as a high-performance luxury car capable of rivaling similar builds from Buick and Oldsmobile. But that was just marketing. In reality, Chrysler, DeSoto's parent company, was struggling to keep up with its Detroit rivals, and in a bid to stay competitive, it released half-baked DeSotos. No, this is not a figure of speech. The build quality of the first DeSoto Adventurer was so abysmal. Cars were rusting almost as soon as they reached the homes of their owners, and there were several reports of some of these cars falling apart. The Adventurer faced another major issue. It was heavy. Weighing in at 4,100 pounds, the DeSoto's decent engine struggled to overcome its substantial weight. The Adventurer could not match its rivals in power, performance, or even handling. It had poor fuel efficiency, no identity, and no brand following. It didn't help the Adventurer that other Chrysler brands like the Chrysler and Dodge. The nail in this Adventurer's coffin was the Eisenhower recession. Many were not interested in a car that wasn't particularly good at anything. The brand never recovered from this flop. Scroll down to 2024, and even this huge flop has suddenly gained a cult following as time has made it very rare. Number 7. 1955 Dodge Lancer. Next on the list is another Chrysler flop, the 1955 Dodge Lancer. The 50s Dodge Lancer would be fondly remembered for its extravagant design that somehow represented what made the 50s so distinct. However, owners would want to forget this vehicle quickly because of its laughable performance. Yes, the Dodge Lancer was stylish, spacey, and had highly advanced features for its time, but remember, this was the mid-50s. People were more interested in practical, high-performance vehicles, and the Dodge Lancer was everything but that. It was poorly assembled, its finish was less than desirable, and worst of all, it was underpowered. The Lancer accelerated poorly, and even though it had several engine options, all trims had relatively low top speeds. It's easy to not like the Dodge Lancer, and it has rightfully earned 7th place on our list of the most hated American vehicles from the 1950s. Number 6. 1953 Studebaker Champion. Right behind the Dodge Lancer is the 1953 Studebaker Champion. Studebaker was renowned for its reliable engines and solid builds that made it a fierce rival to many of the Big Three's models, but things changed after it formed a merger with Packard. After its deal with Packard, the company went on to make several cars of increasingly poor quality. One of the cars that got caught in this messy bunch was the 1953 Studebaker Champion. The Champion was the precursor of the more famous Hawk and was a racy two-door vehicle with a flat-six engine and 3-speed manual. It was both stylish and affordable and could be easily mistaken for the pricier Jaguars and 190 Mercedes. The Champion was a practical and affordable car from a pretty reliable brand, but owners soon started seeing the cracks that would eventually ruin this American automaker. One major problem of the Champion was its underwhelming engine, which could barely push the car to a top speed of 60 miles per hour. An embarrassment to say the least. The engine had a constant tendency to blow head gaskets, the clutch worn out easily, and it had leaky windows that made you dread the rain every time you were in one. The Champion's heritage and sleek exterior could only take it so far, hence it's placed on our list. Did you drive a Studebaker Champion? Don't be shy. Share your experience in the comments. Number 5. 1951 Hudson Hornet. If you thought these other cars were bad, get ready for some of the worst of the worst. To kick off this highly exclusive top 5 section of our list, we have the 1951 Hudson Hornet. The Hudson Hornet wasn't necessarily hated. In reality, it was just avoided for one major reason. Before we reveal that, it is important to note that just like the Hudson Hornet in Disney Pixar's Cars, the 1951 Hudson Hornet was hot on the racetracks thanks to ingenuity in design and functionality. The Hornet had a low center of gravity, dual carburation, and a large engine that race car drivers knew how to exploit. These perks allowed the underdog Hornet to win multiple NASCAR championships. It even helped the competition grow, as the Hornet's upsets fueled the excitement of longtime fans and first-timers. Despite its legendary status on the racetrack, the Hornet failed to appeal to the general public, and it sold only 44,000 units in its first year. In truth, the Hornet wasn't bad. Its only crime was being far too expensive than many would have liked. Rather than buy the Hudson Hornet, most customers went for a cheaper option that was just as good and aesthetically pleasing as this once fantastic vehicle. Before going to our next car, have any of you ever driven or ridden in one of these infamous cars? Share your experience below. We'd love to hear your stories. Number 4. 1955 Plymouth Fury. The Plymouth Fury originally started as a fancy trim option for the Plymouth Belvedere, but it quickly outgrew its humble beginnings to become a standalone model. At $3,067, the Fury was the priciest Plymouth at the time, available in 5 different styles, including a 4-door sedan, a 2-door convertible, and a 4-door wagon. The Fury had all the makings of a classic muscle car, sharing its engine with the Dodge Coronet. This beefy ride came standard with a 5.2-liter engine cranking out 290 horsepower. And if you were feeling extra daring, you could upgrade to a 5.7-liter beast with a jaw-dropping 305 horsepower. The 1958 Plymouth Fury was poised for greatness, stylish, affordable, and an absolute blast to drive. It should have flown off the lot, but as luck would have it, the Fury hit the market right when a recession rolled in like a rain cloud over a parade. Poor quality control and frequent breakdowns did not help the Fury win any friends as people became more interested in practical, budget-friendly cars. Its beastly engines made the Fury a gas guzzler, and its fuel economy was not what recession America needed. If you add in the vehicle's poor suspension and poor handling that made the ride in a Fury feel stiff, you'd understand why this gorgeous car ranked 4th on our list. However, the movie adaptation of Stephen King's Christine gave the Fury a second chance at fame, turning it into an icon of both horror and horsepower. Today, these once-overlooked gems can fetch around $50,000, and in the right auction with the right crowd, they might even go for more. Number 3. 1950 Crosley Hot Shot. The Crosley Hot Shot is our 3rd most hated American vehicle from the 50s. The first sports car out of post-war America was more of a lemon than a legend. The Crosley Hot Shot, tipping the scales at just 1,100 pounds and stretching 145 inches long, was a minor marvel of mediocrity, small, slow, and about as safe as a roller skate on a highway. Yet this little clunker made a cameo in the 1961 driver's Ed Scare film Mechanized Death, perhaps as a warning against bad decisions. The Hot Shot was the brainchild of Powell Crosley Jr., the same guy who brought radios into countless American homes. But radios weren't enough for him. He wanted to make cars too, which he did with the enthusiasm of a child building a model kit, but with slightly less success. Amazingly, a Hot Shot somehow managed to win the Index of Performance at the 1956 Hours of Sebring, a fancy way of saying it was the best of the slowpokes, averaging a blazing 52 miles per hour. But the real kicker was the engine. 0.75-liter 4-cylinder with dual overhead cams, which wasn't cast in sturdy iron but rather slapped together from stamped tin. When the braze joints decided they'd had enough, the engine would loudly protest and overheat, bringing the Hot Shot's short-lived joyride to a steamy end. We can't imagine why anyone would want to drive it. Number 2. 1957 King Midget Model 3. The King Midget story is a perfect snapshot of 1950s America, a time when the middle class could dream big, even if those dreams were small. Claude Dry and Dale Orchid, two Civil Air Patrol buddies from Athens, Ohio, set out to create a no-frills car that anyone could afford, unlike that fancy-pants Henry Ford with his highfalutin Model T. The King Midget made the Model T look like a Bugatti Royale. In the late 1940s, they launched the single-seat Model I as a $500 home-built kit. The kit included the frame, axles, and sheet metal patterns, leaving the body panels to be fashioned by local tradesmen. Any single-cylinder engine could power this humble contraption. The result was a delightfully awful little vehicle, the four-wheeled equivalent of a Briggs & Stratton-powered minibike. Amazingly, Midget Motors kept cranking out these mini-cars until the late 1960s. Their piece de resistance was the Model 3, rolled out in 1957, a little folded steel cracker box powered by a mighty 9-horsepower engine. Finally, government safety standards brought the King Midget era to a merciful close. Number 1 to 1954 Hudson Jet. Let's give you the rundown on the 1953 Hudson Jet, the most hated car from the 50s. This was a compact American car, roughly the same size as a 1956 FE Holden. During a period when independent car makers in the USA were starting to feel the economic pinch due to a price war between Ford, Chrysler, and GM, Hudson CEO A.E. Barrett approved $16 million to develop the Jet. Even by General Motors standards, this was a hefty investment in a market segment that American consumers had largely ignored. After all, why would anyone want a small car when they could opt for a bigger, longer, and lower one? For Hudson, this was a gamble they could barely afford. Had Barrett been more strategic, he might have directed that money toward developing a much-needed OHV V8 engine and giving their full-size cars a styling update. That said, the Jet's fundamentals were solid. It came with a 3.3-liter six-cylinder engine as standard, giving it a power-to-weight ratio that matched larger, more powerful vehicles. Buyers could choose between a 3-speed manual transmission, with or without overdrive, and GM's 4-speed Hydromatic. So far, so good. But then things took a wrong turn. Barrett, along with Hudson's top dealer, Chicago-based Jim Moran, took charge of the car's styling. Barrett insisted that the car be tall enough for passengers to wear a hat comfortably, while Moran, who admired the 1952 Ford, persuaded Barrett to model the Jet's design after Ford's. The result? The Jet ended up being tall, narrow, and with a resemblance to a downsized 1952 Ford. To make the car seem larger, the Jet's brochure featured miniature people, but this tactic fooled no one once the car hit the showroom floor. To make matters worse, Barrett and his team decided to price the Jet almost on par with a full-size Chevrolet. It's no surprise that no one bought it. Only 33,376 units were sold over 2 years, and Hudson lost $10 million on the Jet in 1953 alone. When the struggling Hudson was absorbed by American Motors, AMC, in 1954, AMC already had its successful compact car, the Rambler. George Romney, AMC CEO, saw no place for the slow-selling, unappealing Jet, so it was promptly discontinued. While these cars are regarded as the most hated cars from their time, people change and time heals. As a result, many of these cars have become fan favorites, so don't get all hot and bothered if you see yours on this list. It's not necessarily bad. Let's say it was ahead of its time and call it a day. What's your absolute worst car from the 50s? Let us know in the comments and we might just do a video on it.